Welcome to the Thrive podcast with the Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church.
How does your faith kind of play into it, or does it play into it?
What can be done about it? When I say the church, I'm talking about evangelical white Christians and the black folk who attend their churches.
Hi, welcome to the Thrive podcast with the Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I'm Fred Jeff Smith, pastor of Shiloh, and we welcome you to the 8th season of the Thrive podcast. We thank God for your continued viewership and listenership, and as always, we invite your input. You can reach out to me at fredjeffsmith@gmail.com, fredjeffsmith@gmail.com, and let us know how this podcast can serve you better. I'm very happy to welcome today Mr. Quentin Anderson, who is a candidate for the Louisiana State Senate, the seat recently vacated by Cleo Fields when he became congressman from the 6th District of Louisiana. Mr. Anderson, thank you for taking the time to come and share with us today.
Thank you for having me.
As this is being recorded, we're just coming through a blizzard. I'm 63 years old. I've never seen snow like this in Baton Rouge before. You and your family are safe through this whole ordeal?
Everybody's good. I think the good news, and people have noted this, is we all knew that this was coming, so we had a little bit of time. People had time to go to the grocery store, salt, even the ghettoist salting of steps. we had time to be able to do that, and so I think everybody's good. My mom did not drive throughout this time, which I'm very happy about. I got to check on her after this to make sure she still isn't.
Sure.
Because there's still roads that are still icy.
Right.
Yeah, everybody's good.
Well, we appreciate your taking the time to come out and share with us today. Tell us about your interest in becoming Louisiana State Senator for this particular district at this particular time.
Yeah, I think that's important too, the context and the timing. I'm probably one race away from being a perennial candidate, so I gotta. Hopefully, I win this one. I think that there's a through line though. I ran for Congress last year, and I'm running, and I ran for Metro Council during COVID, and I'm running for state senator now. And I think the through line is representation. And what I really fell in love with last year, and it's not that I didn't know it going in, but you really only experience it when you interact with the voters, is what people really are cynical about. And in large part, it's been a lack of representation, this feeling that when they vote for somebody, the hope is that is now their friend in a high place. That's the person who's looking out for them. And throughout the course of a year's worth of campaigning, 10 different parishes, but here in Baton Rouge in particular, I fell in love with how relatively low the bar was for renewing people's hope in their representatives, in their government. And a lot of it was just don't be bought and paid for. Come back to the neighborhood, ask me what I care about, and then go fight for that, and I want to hear about it on the news. Mm-hmm. And I can do that. And it almost shocks me that is something that people feel like doesn't get done. But I get it. I get how this system works. I get how people get elected, and you're not rewarded for being a good servant. You're rewarded for, sort of being a good errand boy. Mm-hmm. I'm not that. I fell in love with the community. I fell in love with the idea of representation, the selflessness of it. And so I see the mandate as similar. What people wanted during the congressional race is what they want during the Senate race, which is bold, unapologetic representation. And I feel like I can do that. I feel better equipped to do that now than I did at the beginning of the campaign last year.
We're going to get to state politics in a minute. But as we're sitting here, we are 4 days into a Donald Trump presidency, and we have seen significant changes that Mr. Trump has brought in a very short period of time. As someone who is running for state office, is there anything that you have seen that Mr. Trump has done that will affect Louisiana and your Louisiana constituency in the immediate short run?
Yeah, and I think the thing that's on everybody's minds is the moves on immigration, and I guess we can have the quiet part out loud conversation here. Particularly here in Baton Rouge, we do have a sizable Latino population. We have a sizable immigrant population, and let's just be real, we have a good chunk of folks that are undocumented in this city. Mm-hmm. I'm going to try to articulate this as best as possible without giving conservatives too much of a soundbite to use. when we talk about what conservatives like to rail against as sanctuary cities or sanctuary states, I want people to be fully understanding of what the context of that is. No politician would openly just defy the law just for the sake of it, particularly not for people that can't vote for us. So nobody's city is a sanctuary city in the sense that they just allow lawlessness. What it means is traditionally, immigration has been a federal mandate. It has been what the authorities at the federal level are supposed to enforce. Local and state law enforcement don't do that. One of the issues with asking them to do that, one is capacity, but the other is this. Let's say little Maria gets sexually assaulted in her home or at school. Before she calls the cops, she has to think about whether or not the cops are going to ask to see her ID, her parents' ID, because in a non-sanctuary city, in a non-sanctuary state, as soon as they have a suspicion that the people that they're talking to are undocumented, now, instead of investigating the sexual assault, now we're about to deport Maria and her family. I want people to understand, there might be people who heard that and are like, yeah, good riddance, they shouldn't have been here undocumented. What that does is, remember, we have whole parts of our town that are completely full of undocumented folks because that's how the slush is made. There are companies here that depend on low-wage labor. All of a sudden, those parts of town become red light districts. All of a sudden, lawlessness is allowed in those parts of town. All of a sudden, a psycho can go into the part of town where he knows undocumented people are and torment those people. And what are they going to do? Who are they going to call? The reason why we have some of these structures in place is to allow for us to actually pursue crime, to allow for us to have some sort of stability, to have some sort of modicum of public safety. The moves that are happening at the federal level are emboldening local law enforcement to, instead of focusing on public safety, reducing crime, now it's on a witch hunt for people that don't look like us, don't sound like us, may or may not be citizens. And that probably is my biggest concern, is that it's not going to be a by the books, search and capture of undocumented folks. It's going to be folks that are based on prejudice and stereotypes. And that, for me, particularly in this district, as I've canvassed, I am concerned about what the impact, not only just of those policies as they trickle down into our community will be, but the chilling effect of just the prospect of those policies trickling into our local law enforcement, into our schools. Do families stop sending their kids to our schools because they're concerned? I am very, very, very concerned. And the biggest concern that I have is that it's a population that's about to be targeted that largely does not have any political power. They don't vote. They often don't want to be identified. They don't get counted in the census often. And so this is the most vulnerable folks. And I get that we have to address our immigration crisis, but we also don't have to be evil.
It's interesting that you lift immigration. For me, I'm a little bit older than you are. It's revoking the Equal Employment Opportunities Act that President Johnson signed into effect in 1965, and I would think that would have a direct and negative impact upon hiring and employment opportunities for black people in a state that is 33% black. I have serious concerns about that, particularly when you consider the fact that our governor, prior to Mr. Trump becoming president, was doing all that he could to get rid of DEI in universities and colleges. And now they're threatening businesses to either toe the line and come across to their way of thinking or face investigation and perhaps lawsuits. What are your thoughts regarding DEI and the Equal Employment Opportunities Act?
I think that's an interesting area where I think there's sort of a dichotomy. I think it's going to have a bigger impact on public hiring, government hiring, universities, things like that. I think in the private sector, one of the interesting things about capitalism is people want everybody's money. They want black folks' money, white folks' money, they want gay people's money, they want straight people's money. And so I do think that while the protections at the federal level are very important, and I do think that you still have other protections that we'll see how the courts it's going to be a very interesting few years, depending on how the courts interpret some of those existing protections. But I do think that in the private sector, I think that hiring largely will be dictated still by capitalism, by the fact that if you still want to appeal to black communities, black folks still need to see leaders that look like them. If you want to appeal to the gay community, gay folks still need to know that they are heard and they're being involved in active policy and marketing and things like that. So I do think that in the private sector, one of the good things about capitalism is that in order to appeal to the widest swath of customers and clients, you still, in today's day and age, your employment needs to largely reflect that. Now, what is that going to look like at the C-suites? I don't know, but also there's the law and then there's the law. The C-suites were already looking pretty exclusive and homogenous before. But I do think that the biggest place where it may have an impact is in government hiring. I think that the private sector was largely self-governing itself. We'll see.
You think so?
I don't think that it's the case in every industry, but I do think that largely, that's one of the reasons why boycotts typically have more of an impact on industries than, an executive order.
Boycotts, it's interesting you bring that up because I'm doing a Stay in Prayer segment in the next week or so having to do with boycotts. And a professor who I cite in the article, his name escapes me right at this moment, made the point that boycotts of business and industry generally has very little impact on the economics of that business, but has a greater impact in public perception of,
which I think trickles,
of the company.
Which I think trickles. Like, I think if you were to look at Tommy Hilfiger's demographics of who buys that product, it probably takes quite a dip when it comes to people of color in the 90s and ever since then. I think that is where some of that does come from, where the boycott itself, because it's very hard to get everybody. I mean, I think in the 60s it might have been a little bit easier for some things, but it's a little bit harder to get everybody, but it's the perception, right? It's like if a Black Lives Matter activist gets 100 people to boycott a McDonald's, all of a sudden, even though it's not every black person that's doing it, the headline is Black Lives Matter boycotts McDonald's.
Yes.
And that's what they then have to address.
Yes.
And all of a sudden you get the commercials with a black voice narrating the commercial of a black boy walking through the hood getting a job for minimum wage, and they say that, McDonald's cares.
Right.
That's usually how capitalism has an impact, and that's where boycotts typically have an impact. It's not broad scale because it's hard. It's hard to get everybody to stop buying something, but it is a little bit easier to paint a narrative. But like I said, I think that on the equal employment issues at the federal level, I think it's going to have a greater impact on government hiring. I'd be interested to see how it trickles down, but I just think that our society is so small right now, and it's so reactionary to what people are saying on things like social media and in the news, that it's hard to have a good business model that is also discriminatory, whether it's in employment or it's in how you appeal to customers. Unless you're Alex Jones.
We just had a practical example of government responding to crisis with this snowstorm that blanketed the bulk of Louisiana, if not all of Louisiana. As someone who aspires towards state office, give me your assessment of how the state responded to this crisis. It wasn't something that anybody sought. It's a natural occurrence. But how do you think our government responded to the crisis? What would you have done differently?
Well, I think those are different things. I think with the tools available to us, this was as good of a response as I would have expected from the officials that are here. But there are criticisms that have existed for a long time. For example, we've had ice storms in the past, and I'd say they're fairly regular, even if they're not annual. I'd say they're fairly regular. And so our ability to treat our streets and our roads to allow not only people to be able to travel, but commerce, particularly interstate commerce, trucks, things like that, shipping. We should have invested in at least a handful of salt trucks, high-level salt trucks. Maybe they're based out of Alexandria, and we just distribute them on an as-needed basis, but we rely on loans from places like Arkansas and Texas, and that takes time, but it also limits our capacity. I think in some of these cases, I get the argument that, well, we don't get snowstorms all the time, so why would we invest in that infrastructure? But it's because of moments like this.
You got a large number of bridges.
We do.
I-10 is like, what, 30 miles of bridges
and we have
between here and Lafayette?
And we have, and it's beyond the internal interest. It's an interstate interest, right? Like when we have ice storms that shut down everything here, it's not just, well, we Louisianans, we're just going to stay home. It's that anybody who has to go between, Mississippi, Alabama, and Texas, they have to get through Louisiana, and now they can't. So shipping suffers. Our ability to prepare for these contingencies that may not be annual but are regular, I think, is something that we need to improve. And I think that there are technologies that we can invest in. I think that there are partnerships that we can have that don't put the onus on us to have huge budgetary line items every year for these things. We can often loan them out as well. But we need to be a little bit better prepared for these things. And also what it did feel like was that the sheltering procedures and protocols felt very much like they were done, on the fly a little bit. I saw one of the shelters that was here, and it was very much makeshift, and I think that we have to do a better job, not just because of winter storms. We regularly get hit with hurricanes. We are on the business end of the climate crisis. We need to do a better job of having measures in place for the unhoused when we do have these emergency crises.
Baton Rouge and New Orleans, I can't speak so much about Shreveport. We have fairly significant. We have a fairly significant homeless problem
that's kind of an understatement.
that exists here, and it's not just with freezing temperatures. I mean, it's a year-round thing.
Yep.
And if it weren't for places like St. Vincent de Paul, and I guess to a lesser extent the Salvation Army here locally, we would be up a creek without a canoe.
Yeah.
I don't see a large government response, and in fairness, that's true of local and state government, to our homeless dilemmas, to do something to get the unhoused housed.
Yeah.
Do you think that more should and
Absolutely.
could be done in that regard?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, and I'm not sure if I shared this, but I was homeless for 2 or 3 months out of law school, and I was like street homeless, like not couch surfing or anything like that. What would happen is I overestimated how valuable my law degree was. Did not find a job. A lot of things happened. Got evicted from my apartment the day that I was supposed to graduate from LSU Law School. So for the next 2 or 3 months, I am literally sleeping in one of my old law school classrooms after the law school would close. I'd wake up early enough to be able to go to the UREC, the gym on campus, work out, take a shower, and then I'd head back to the law school once it opened, and I'd look like I was studying for the bar, but really I was just applying for jobs, and I did that for a couple of months. And one of the things that you learn there, both there and when I worked at the Capital Area Alliance for the Homeless, is that many of the folks that are homeless, I would consider myself to be fairly fortunate. I felt like it was inevitable that I was going to find a job, that I was going to find work, that I'd find stability. I just needed to hold on. For a lot of the folks that are there, they don't have that inevitability. Many of them suffer from mild to severe mental illness. Many of them are in situations where without significant assistance, they're never going to find the stability that I think people very cavalierly tell them to go find when they pass by them driving on the road, when they're like, why don't you just go get a job? In many cases, some of these people are schizophrenic. They're not going to be able just to go and get a job, and even if they did, they're going to be looking for a job in 2 weeks. And so having some empathy at the outset of our policy when it comes to the unhoused population is really important, because I think the biggest resistance is a perception that the unhoused are there by, in some way, shape, or form, by fault of their own, or worse, by choice. You have some folks that are like, hey, if you just went and got a job, if you worked hard, this impression that everybody out there is lazy. Baby girl at North Acadian in Florida, I don't think that anybody in Baton Rouge that's ever driven in the inner city of Baton Rouge doesn't know who she is. She'll come up to your car, she's dancing, she's not going to be able just to go and get a job.
Right.
And so we need to have some empathy. We need to understand this population. We need to understand what the needs of this population are and understand what it takes for them to be stable. For some people, it really might be that a medical situation really casts them into a rabbit hole of debt. And so that's more about financial stability. And when we can get your life stable, you'll be up and going. But for some people, they do need long-term assistance. And we need to do better about having systems in place, programs in place that go and identify these people, intake these people, and make sure that we are treating them humanely and get them the resources that they need. When I was at the Capital Area Alliance for the Homeless, and you make a good point, it's private folks that are doing this, meaning that there isn't the capacity to do this for everybody. We need the public capacity to make sure that anybody who is out on that street is going through intake, and we make sure that we're putting them on a path to getting housed. But the other part of that is making sure that when when we have a plethora of resources that address everybody's needs, making sure that we're proactive about making sure we get people into those programs. That does mean having street teams that are out, similar to what you saw during the winter storm, going and identifying people and making sure we get the resources to them. Because in many cases, it's a population that's very skeptical of somebody that walks up to them in a van, in a government official uniform, and tells them that they're there to help. There's some trust building that needs to be had there. But we absolutely need huge investments in this. It's not that people don't recognize the need. I think that the resistance is a lack of empathy, this misunderstanding of the population that's out there.
Help me understand your assessment of public-private partnerships and its effectiveness in improving the quality of life for people within this state. You're running for state office.
Yeah.
My focus is usually local.
Yeah.
But with regard to state office, BRAF, Baton Rouge Area Foundation, has funneled a significant amount of money, and it's not their money. It's the money of private philanthropists that they have given to BRAF for the purposes of doing certain things. But BRAF gets the credit for significant funding for the dredging of University Lakes around LSU and City Park. Why are we more concerned about dredging lakes than we are about the unhoused and the homeless? And again, it's not entirely fair to lay that at BRAF's feet. If somebody gives money and it's designated for a certain project, then BRAF's responsibility is to make sure that the money gets to the project that they ask for. But what does it say that we don't have as much concern about the homeless as we do about dredging man-made lakes that could go away tomorrow, and I wouldn't care less if they went away, make driving through the city a whole lot easier. Anyway, what does that say about our collective priorities in this city, and I would imagine by expansion in the state?
A couple things there. I think more broadly, I think you hit on something. It does say something about our decreasing fidelity to the social compact that we all are a part of, that we pay taxes to a general fund, and that general fund should then be invested equitably. So if my roads are good, but the roads across town are crappy, then that general fund will be invested in the crappy roads. Increasingly, and you see it in education, you see it in a whole bunch of areas, people are starting to become more tribal. That I'm invested in my people, in my community, in my neighborhood, where my kids go to school, and I don't have any investment in what's going on over there. The crime rate is high in the black community. That's their problem, like those sort of things. And I think that you see that sometimes in defunding of government and a greater movement of private funds to then fund supposedly public projects, because then you can be more selective, you can be more exclusive. It's not the mandate of government, it's the mandate of private philanthropy or private interests. So I think that that's kind of the philosophy that's guiding some of that. What I'd say from a government perspective, particularly at the local and state level, public-private partnerships, practically speaking, and I get pushback on this because I think people think that I'm endorsing it or that I think it's the preferred way. I'm just sort of explaining why it's a tool in the toolkit. At the state and local level, you can't really run up deficits. So you have a limited amount of money, and when you have things that you want to invest in, it still has to come out of that pool of money. The more public-private partnerships that you have, the more, theoretically, public money that you have available for the things that you feel like you want to invest public dollars in. And for somebody like me, where we're having this debate about should public dollars go to where they're needed, or should they go to like where people are loudest and they have the most influence? It is a beneficial tool for me to take advantage of a public-private partnership to enhance capacity, either to save public money so that we can invest it in something that we can guarantee and that sort of thing to people, or for us to have more money for other projects that we care about, but just, again, expanding how much capacity we have. So it might be that a public-private partnership gives us the ability to have a direct service, whereas the government money simply was going to allow us to have an office, but people would have had to come to the office to get that service. So there are different benefits to public-private partnerships, but I think that what you're sort of touching on is right. It's that balance. It's, one, how are you utilizing these public-private partnerships, and are those the private part of that partnership, are they taking advantage of the public? And that's the part that you want to sort of address. At the federal level, you don't have, it still happens, but you don't have to do it as much, because you do have the option of, we're just going to spend this money because it's a long-term investment, and we'll live in a deficit for a little bit, but we'll get it on the back end. We can't do that at the local level, and so that's why these partnerships are attractive.
What do you do when you think, as I do, that the private part of this public-private venture is taking advantage of the public? And I'll give you a specific example of what I'm talking about. This new LSU arena that they're talking about building. When they started, it was $350 million. I believe the last number I heard was in excess of $500 million that's being spent on this project. And in order for them to move forward, they required of the parish that we enter into a 30-year non-compete clause with other entertainment venues within the parish, most notably the Raising Cane's Civic Center, and things like that. And for the life of me, the one thing I disagree with our former mayor about was, why in the world would we enter into such an agreement if you're building this state-of-the-art arena that will be able to attract first-tier talent into the Baton Rouge area? Why do we have to enter into a non-compete clause for a 50-year-old civic center downtown in order to make that work? And it seems to me that this is private dollars taking advantage of the desire of the city to have this kind of facility built, and it ain't gonna net but 2,600 more seats than the PMAC.
It's an unusual setup.
Yeah,
it's an unusual setup.
So how does the guy on the street respond to such a thing when they see dollars being, from my perspective, please educate me if I'm wrong, being misspent?
Yeah.
And over a 30-year period of time? Really? You need a 30-year non-compete in order to make this work?
I would say that the layman should be outraged, because that's not a normal deal. There's a lot of things that aren't normal about it. One, I mean, like let's think just about what we know here in Baton Rouge. When was the last time you went to a show at the LSU Arena?
Me?
I'm an LSU alumni.
Yeah, I am too.
I am.
I don't go.
Like the last time I went to any large-scale performance or anything like that, I don't know the last time I did it, but it was probably at the River Center. That is typical. Like that's where you typically, the Superdome, things like that.
Right.
And the reason for it, I mean, I'm not a big fan of these deals either, but the reason for it is that it does become equal parts the public. The public gets to host conventions and all that other good stuff, and the private gets that core interest. They get the concessions, all that stuff. This feels almost as blatant. I'm just gonna be honest. This feels almost as blatant in terms of like trying to acquire and control valuable tax assets as when St. George was trying to take Seagan Lane and Mall of Louisiana.
Yeah.
It's this increasing pattern, particularly here in this town, but I guess you could say across the South, of using interesting math, accounting, however you want to put it, to segregate the most valuable assets from majority black populations. And that's what this feels like. There's no reason to make that investment in the LSU arena if you're not going to make that investment in the Raising Cane's, if you're not going to make that investment in the River Center. That's where the greater good would be. That's where the collective community benefit would be. I would be completely honest with you. Unless you went to LSU, most black folks have never been on LSU's campus. And so while it may not officially be exclusive, if you live in this community, like, you know, there are certain things that happen in certain parts of town that don't feel like you were invited to them, even if there is an open cover. And I think that that's what it feels like a symptom of. More broadly, again, I'm not opposed to public-private partnerships, but I share the same concern that increasingly in places like this, the private part seems to be controlling the public part.
Yes.
And that's where my concern comes from, is that it seems more like just sort of a formality, but it's a way of private interest controlling public dollars. So it's amplifying their capacity more than what I mentioned before, which is public-private partnerships should be amplifying the public capacity to be able to do things. Instead, it's just kind of, you know, giving private interests some house money.
Yeah. So let's get back to the state legislature.
Okay.
What's your opinion of the Legislative Black Caucus? If you should be successful in securing this seat, you would become a part of the Legislative
I would.
Black Caucus. The Legislative Black Caucus
be fair, it's
has
volitional.
a wonderful history, but presently I have concerns about the Legislative Black Caucus, and I want to get your assessment. I don't see a whole lot of strength from the Legislative Black Caucus. I don't see a whole lot of demand for the public good coming out of the Legislative Black. I don't see a whole lot of strategy coming out of the Legislative Black Caucus. Yeah. And I know a lot of the people who are a part of it, and I'm sure I'm going to get chastised for that. But as someone who would become a part of, and I would imagine is a more close observer of the activity of the Legislative Black Caucus, I'm asking you to help me with my assessment. Is my assessment, in your opinion, on point, or is there something about it that needs to be corrected?
So first, I will say that as far as I am aware, I believe the Legislative Black Caucus membership is still volitional, but I would be a member if I was elected. I'm not gonna be the weird one. I think that the lack of audacity that you see coming out of the Louisiana Legislative Black Caucus is largely reflective of the lack of audacity from the broader Democratic caucus. The reason I think why it hits a little bit different is, I'm trying to think of how many people I want to take off today. I think the reason why it feels a little bit different is because of the political dynamics of how black folks in this state get elected. Let me say this. Most elected officials in this state, but particularly in the Democratic Party, particularly in the Black Caucus, those are not the principles. When you are negotiating legislation, when you are asking what their position on an issue is, you'd be better off asking them who to talk to than talking directly to them. I mentioned to you maybe a week or two ago that I had been approached by some folks who wanted to contribute to my campaign, and what they were motivated by was, oh, you know, you're going to break up that Clio machine, and we need that. And as they kept talking, they said some things that kind of raised alarms in my ear. They were like, you know, And one of the things that the folks that I'm with like about you, Quentin, is that you got some good sense. You want to see the city move forward. You're not gonna like hold us back. You're not gonna hold us back. And pulled on that thread a little bit more. And what they mean, and they name dropped a bunch of people, members of the Black Caucus, members of Metro Council, politicians all across town who have taken the deal. What they mean is that when a nice comprehensive piece of legislation, maybe at the state level, maybe at the Metro Council, maybe school board, comes up, and let's just say we want to invest, we're going to build a beautiful shopping center in South Downs. But we also, and I always use this example, but we also need to put a tire shredder somewhere. And that's part of the deal.
Mm-hmm.
The black person that they really like, that is all about progress and isn't going to hold us back and is really understands how things go. You're not like those other black folks. That guy says, yeah, no, put the tire shredder here, build the shopping center in South Downs.
In North Baton Rouge.
For all of us.
In North Baton Rouge.
In North Baton Rouge.
Yes.
Yeah. What they want is they want a patsy. And in exchange, they will give you enough money so that you can win your elections and you can be fancy. You can have a title. You can have everybody around town can know who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And all you have to do is just play ball.
Mm-hmm.
And what I have learned, and not just in the course of the last couple campaigns, but also in working at the Capitol and in helping try to move some legislation. Most of these politicians, but in particular, many members of the Black Caucus, have greater fidelity to that deal than they do to the communities that they were elected to serve. And part of it is because a lot of politicians are not confident in their own ability to win votes, to win arguments, to win elections on their own. They came up in a system in which the people that won were the people that had the most money, were the people that hired the most people, were the people that had the most signs. And so at the end of the day, they don't believe that they can win simply by being a good representative of their people. They don't believe that good politics is by taking a stand behind closed doors. They believe that good politics is taking good money. And that's it. And so the lack of audacity that you see from the Black Caucus is, if you listen closely, that's a leash that you hear being pulled. And that's the money. And when that money, local press doesn't like to do this, and part of it is, and I talked with a reporter the other day, part of it is the local political press here are, no offense to them, they're good people, they're well-intentioned, but they are mostly junior journalists. They are people, it's their first beat. They are not willing to dive deeper into where the money comes from. But in this town and in this state, that money is a greater determinant of what the governing is going to look like than any letter next to your name, than any skin color. There are just as many black folks in that legislature that are being funded by your Eddie Rasponis, your Lane Grigsby's, your Woody Jenkinses, as there are folks that are being funded by any progressive interests. In fact, there are less. There are far less that are being funded by progressive interests than there are that are just being funded by pro-business, be a good black guy, get out the way and let us move the state forward, even if that means trampling on a few black faces. That is probably at least the plurality of the Black Caucus. And I am not indicting them as some anti-black crusade. It's more of a pro-black crusade. These are not people who are representing our community. These are people who made a deal with people outside of our community, and what their deal is I will sell out the community, but I'll figure out a nice way to put a face on it. And then we keep re-electing them. And so if I get elected and I become a member of the Black Caucus, I think part of my job is going to be to challenge my fellow members to do what we were sent there to do. But part of the difficulty with that challenge is some of those people were sent there to do exactly what they're doing. And so it is important to try to move the caucus in the direction of being more responsive to the communities that they serve. But it is also incumbent upon us as a community to be a little bit more diligent the next time these elections come around in 27 to make sure that we're electing people that are actually advocating for our interests, that are showing up, that aren't just, I say this all the time, aren't just giving us a turkey dinner or a backpack, but are actually, soliciting us for what's going on in our community. And then when they vote, they need to explain how that vote connects to what they told us during the campaign. Because I find it hard to believe that you can represent poor people, but then go and vote to raise people's taxes. That to me is a really difficult thing for me to process, and yet it happened. It happened not because people solicited their community, but they solicited their donors. And
Raise
their
poor
donors
people's taxes.
raise poor people. Yeah. I want to be clear. Not
Let's be
everybody's
very
taxes,
clear.
Not everybody's
Yeah.
taxes got raised.
Poor
Not
people's
everybody's
taxes.
got raised.
Yes.
But yeah, if your Disney Plus subscription just got raised, if you just went to the grocery store and the groceries just got raised, like if your cost of living just got higher and your salary didn't, it was largely a lot of Democrats, particularly Democrats in the Black Caucus, that voted for that.
This governor has no problem with waiving taxes for business and industry.
Yeah.
And he has no problem levying regressive taxes, primarily sales taxes, on poor black, brown people. So I just want to be clear that we talk about where the tax money is actually coming from.
And that's not free money. I want people to understand. Like, I don't want this just to be an anti-democratic thing. I want to remind people I am a Democrat. But the way some Democrats justify voting for it is, one, they'll say, well, you don't know the things that we fought for behind the scenes. You'll see some of that later on. But the other thing is they say that they got a promise from the governor and Republicans that they would not cut social services. That even though this tax break is going to be a huge budget, to have a huge budgetary impact, that they just would not cut social services. Even if you take them at their word, which you should not, but even if you take them at their word, what do you think is going to happen when average folks, their cost of living is going up and Republicans start railing against government programs over the course of the next couple of years? Even if the Republicans never actually take an axe to the budget over the course of the next 2 years, what do you think the next election is going to be about? What do you think they're going to make the next election about? That deal will be good for about 2 years.
Yeah.
And then in 2 years, when inevitably Democrats don't compete at the gubernatorial level, they just get insular and try to protect the all-black districts, and so we have an even slimmer super minority in the legislature. They're going to take an axe to all of those social programs. And what are the Democrats going to do? Nothing. Just vote for the next Landry budget. That's what they're going to do. And so if we're not more serious about standing up for our values, it just becomes worse and worse. And we end up taking even worse deals. And the type of Democrats that we have in the legislature now will somehow convince themselves that they have to take even the worst deal. When you get the better deal by fighting for it on the front end, and they're not doing that. But in particular, to just bring it home, for the Black Caucus to have voted for that bill, that's a tough one. It makes me wonder, what is the point of the Black Caucus meetings? What are we talking about? Like, are we not talking about, hey, like, this bill is going to raise taxes on literally all of our constituents?
Yes.
There's no benefit to this.
Yes.
Yeah, let's vote for it though.
Yeah.
Like I might not get invited to the cookout if that's what the meetings are.
Yeah.
Because I don't understand that.
Yeah.
But again, I'm not accepting the same money that they are, so they might be speaking Mandarin, and I just don't get it.
Well, the other part of that, let's carry this argument a little bit farther. I'm not sure how exactly this plays into what we're discussing, but conservatives have been pretty shrewd about taking over local governments that have been traditionally black strongholds. We have seen it happen in Shreveport. We've seen it happen in Monroe. We've seen it happen in Alexandria. Most recently, we saw it happen here in Baton Rouge. And my sense is that there's going to be some kind of effort to do the same thing in New Orleans. What is that all about, and why is it that conservatives have been so successful in doing this from your point of view? They plant a candidate into the race to divide the black electorate, and they use that division in order to get the conservative that they want in the seat. I really didn't think that it would be successful here, but it was. So help me to understand from your perspective how that plays into state politics, because it was interesting that when Mr. Edwards won the mayor's race, he couldn't take Mayor Broom's concession call because he was on the phone with Jeff Landry and John Kennedy, which lets me know that they were a part of what took place.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think partisan politics is always going to be partisan politics. I expect Republicans to support Republicans.
But why are they successful? Baton Rouge is majority black.
Yeah.
This should not have happened here.
No, yes and no. I think there are two types of ways in which this happens. I think what you're describing is the political process, and again, while I don't always like the outcome, I respect good political strategy, and I think that the political strategy of divide and conquer it's an obvious one. We could do a better job of defeating it. We just don't. We fall for it. That less concerns me because I think that they're manipulating the rules as they are to their benefit than sometimes like what you see in places like Jackson, Mississippi, where they systematically disenfranchise that entire political structure there, where the state legislature controls pretty much the local budget there and local decisions. That's effectively like how D.C. is run, but D.C. is a federal district. No, you're exactly right. You're exactly right. So that is more concerning to me, where what people are doing is straight up just manipulating the entire system to disenfranchise black folks. What you're seeing in cities here in Louisiana, what you will probably see in New Orleans, and I don't know that it's not everything in Louisiana is racial, and I think it'll start as racial before it becomes partisan. I think that New Orleans is close to probably getting another white mayor again, and part of that is the demographics. Part of that is the long-term effects of Katrina, with the population there just changing, and who came back, who invested, that sort of thing. The Ninth Ward looks like Brooklyn, like that's going to have an impact, and so you'll probably get a white liberal mayor, and then what that will do is
moderate.
Maybe,
moderate. Moderate.
And what that will do is, because politics in Louisiana is so racial, just electing a white person gives people this idea. Because I think people put an asterisk next to Mitch because he's a Landrew and Moon's son and all that.
Yeah.
But I think that when somebody else gets elected, I think it opens the door that, okay, like this majority black population, we can still get some white power in there. And I don't mean it like that. But the political process for let's take Baton Rouge, for example. Part of that is, I think, and this isn't going to be popular with everybody, I've never been a big fan of the jungle primary system. I just haven't. I actually like having closed primaries. I think what it does is it makes it a binary choice come election day, and it doesn't allow for some of the machinations that you see here happen. I mean, go back to Michael Jackson a long time ago, where somebody's singular ambition can have an impact on the broader landscape. I think that's where primaries are for.
It may work in the primary system, but in the runoff system, where you're free to vote for whoever you want to, it still comes out the same way. They get the guy that they want.
But there's a couple things about that system that make it unique. One, the fact that our runoff happens well after a normal election day. It happens on a Saturday, which is abnormal for just our political system and all that. So those things, I think, are things that make it unique. I think in a normal primary process, the primary happens long before November, and then the actual election happens in November. You're trying to maximize turnout. I think in those cases, I feel better about those. The fact that we passed it just for the federal offices and not for the state and local offices, I think is a way. White Republicans recognize that there's a lot of power in this system. They can play black folks against each other. They can sometimes, people don't always know the difference between interests if both faces look the same. And I think that that's somewhat what happened here. But I will say that in the Baton Rouge race, and I like Ted. I think that Ted is well intentioned. I think that he's an ambitious man. But I think that for him to have believed that Republican power brokers were going to fund him and him alone, I would not have believed that. And I do believe that him and his team believed that going into filing last year. I think that they did believe that, Ted was going to be the unifying candidate, that he'd be able to get disaffected Democratic voters, he'd be able to get Republican voters, and the pro-business community would get behind him, and that he was the guy. And I think that is a short-sighted view of how power works in this town. Power doesn't make concessions, power strategizes. and they were going to put somebody in. They always do. And the fact that Ted took that deal, I think, is not a great reflection of political judgment, and I hope that he's learned from that.
Okay. We'll move on from that. I think he made a terrible decision.
Yeah.
That's going to negatively impact his political viability in the future.
To be fair, though, I do want to say this. In politics, you cannot, and I've always hated this when people are like, no, we should have gotten to a back room and decided who's going to run and who's not. You should always prepare for whatever happens. And so Mayor Broome also needed to be a stronger candidate. Mayor Broome, and that happened, well, that should have happened during the campaign, but that should have happened during the last 8 years of her administration. So Mayor Broome also invited her vulnerability. She invited challenges, but that does not negate everybody else's complicity.
The main thing that Mayor Broome did was she stood up against St. George and said, you will not do this without a fight.
That was one.
Let me use this example with regard to St. George, because I think that it may not have been the only one, but to me it was the largest one. She had the audacity to tell white folk no. I think that she paid a terrible price for that. But if you're going to divorce yourself from the rest of the parish, you have the right to do that.
Yeah.
But in so doing, you don't have the right to say, I'm walking out and you're going to pay me to walk out.
I agree.
And that's what the mayor opposed. St. George had, I guess, as much right as Zachary and Central to form its own independent community. But what they wanted, and let's not forget, the original impetus for this was a school system.
Yep.
They were told that it would be easier for you to get an independent school system if you were an incorporated city.
Yeah.
So we're going to build a city.
That's right.
Just so we can have a school district.
Yeah.
And they had the right to do it. The state gave them the ability to vote independent of the rest of the parish on this issue, and they were able to do that. But the mayor said, you need to present a plan, because I'm not just mayor of Baton Rouge, I'm the president of the parish, and you need to present an economically viable plan that we can sit down and agree upon before we're going to release any monies to you.
Yep.
That's not an unreasonable position for her to take, but it's so angered the white community of St. George that this black woman would dare stand up to them and say, no, you can't do this unless you're willing to do this way. And they devised a plan that gave them an opportunity to do what they want. And now with this mayor in place, they're going to get everything they want.
Yeah, probably.
You got a police chief who doesn't have a police department.
Yeah.
He's getting paid $150,000 a year to liaise with the East Baton Rouge Parish Sheriff's Office. That's his position.
Great deal.
He ain't got a car. He doesn't have a badge.
Yeah.
He doesn't have a dog.
Yeah.
He doesn't have anything with regard to law enforcement, and they're going to pay him $150,000 a year to liaise with the East Baton Rouge Parish Sheriff's Office, which, by the way, should not be the chief law enforcement officer within the city of St. George, but
no, I get it.
That's an argument for another day. But all of that led to a resentment towards the mayor that I think opened the door for what we saw take place. And in my opinion, Mr. James, who I like, Ted was raised in this church. I think he made a severe miscalculation.
Yeah, I think we agree that I think he certainly made a miscalculation in the run last year. But I'd actually disagree with you on why Sharon lost. I think that Mayor Broome, I'd say that the St. George thing was the only thing that got Mayor Broome into the runoff. Because for many of her supporters, I considered myself to be among them. We expected more when she got elected in 2016. We expected her to read the room, understand the assignment, the mandate, the energy that she was getting elected with, and we expected her to be bolder. Most of her administration felt like Kip Holden light, except when it came to St. George. And that was a fight that I was working it together, Baton Rouge together, Louisiana at the time. I fought alongside. That was when she was boldest, and that was the through line every time I struggled with who I was supporting prior to November. That was what it always came back down to. Was I was very concerned about the sort of deals that Ted probably agreed to get the support that he did regarding St. George. But the thing that honestly always broke my heart and made it difficult for me to do any public advocacy for the mayor was Brave Cave. The Brave Cave situation was one of the most disappointing developments in a politician that I support's career that I've ever experienced. And it's because of the broader context. It's the fact that she was elected in part, and I don't know if she internalized this, but many of us who voted for her, many of us who supported her in 2016, thought that what she was going to do was take that energy and reform our police department, change what the relationship was between law enforcement and our community. Like, we wanted to see improvements. And
you don't think Murphy Paul was an improvement over previous police chiefs? I do. I frankly think he was the best hire that she made, notwithstanding the fact that Brave Cave happened under his watch.
I get it.
But I think Murphy Paul was the best hire that she made. She actually made the police department do some work and make some changes.
I get it, but nobody,
especially coming out of Alton Sterling.
I get it, but nobody remembers the wonderful principal after a school shooting. What everybody remembers is the tragedy. And the thing that I am most, it broke my heart that in the blackest part of town, in the part of town that had gotten the most attention during the protests in 2016, that we were operating a torture chamber. And not only that, and I get, at this point, like the decisions that she made after that, it was either, do I want to lose an election or do I want to go to jail? She said, didn't know anything about it. I don't know very many politicians who would have done well in that political environment. And the honest to God truth is the jungle primary is the only thing that saved her. Because if it had been just a closed Democratic primary where she, for months, had to make her case to Democratic constituencies and often had to get questioned about Brave Cave, often had to get questioned about the homelessness problem, I think that she would have struggled because I think the lack of audacity, the lack of boldness while she was in office made it difficult for the people that supported her to be passionate about that support. And the combination of that, plus either a more energetic candidate in Ted, and I'll give him that, more energy, or a candidate that people didn't know well enough to hate in Sid, that's a dangerous combination when you're running for a third term. And largely, it's not because things are going to, there's going to be sunshine and rainbow on the other side of that third term, but just because, like, come on, guys, let's finish the job. I'm not so sure that everybody felt excited about what finishing the job might look like. And that's not to say that people are preferring Coach Sid, but sometimes, when people are underwhelmed, it's hard to bring them out to an election on a cold Saturday.
Well, you had 2 weeks to vote before that.
You did. But you get what I mean. You get what I mean.
I do get your point. I don't share it, but I do understand your point of view. Talk about a couple of other things. Okay. Are we going to ever get a second bridge out of Baton Rouge across the Mississippi River? I saw that the governor went to Washington to lobby for infrastructure needs in Louisiana. I'm sure the bridge was not the singular issue on his mind, but for people who live here and they have to face traffic going over the bridge, it's a major concern.
We talked about it last time. I am hopeful. This is the one, I'm not, because that's rude. I was going to say this is the one good thing that might have come out of the congressional race last year. We have a Democratic congressperson for the 6th Congressional District, and to acknowledge what his strength is, I think that he should be an effective player in getting federal resources, particularly to this region. And that would be an area specifically with the governor's very conservative appeal to the federal government last week when, I always thought that conservatives thought that more money needed to be in the hands of people, not the federal government. But apparently Jeff Landry, he can shift a little bit when he needs it. The appeal that he made, particularly for infrastructure, coupled with the fact that we do have a new congressperson, a new Democratic congressperson that should look out for the interests of this region in particular, gives me hope. I mean, that's kind of it. Is the fact that there should be additional federal resources, and using the governor's own words should allow us, at least from a public messaging perspective, to push the envelope and push this agenda through. What I'm worried about is what it might be coupled with, because you rarely get clean bills, but I would like to see that done, and I'd like to work with Congressman Fields on that in making sure that we get the funds necessary to being able to not just address that part of the infrastructure, but a lot of the congestion highway infrastructure projects that we have on the docket.
Should you be successful in securing this state Senate seat, are there any specific committees within the state legislature that you would like to serve on? Do you have your eye on any particular department or subcommittee of the state Senate that you would like to have a seat on?
Yeah, transportation is one, partly because of what I tell people is if I had a legacy item for any office, but like as long as I'm representing Baton Rouge, I want to make sure that we are investing heavily in our public transit system here. I want to have a strong part of that conversation, but from a statewide perspective, I want to finally build that New Orleans to Baton Rouge commuter rail that has kind of been perpetually on the docket.
It's another public-private partnership.
It is. It doesn't necessarily need to be, because most of the infrastructure that we have to build we have to build so much new infrastructure for it that it starts to get away from some of the justification for the public-private partnership outside of just the funds. But if you can get the federal funds for it, which I think that you can, and if it's a priority at the state level, I think that we can invest in that. I think energy is another one, partly because of what I would be representing. It's not. I want to be at the table for the conversations that are being had, not just about expansion projects, but about the impact of these industries in my district. And then education. Part of that is because most of last year was about, when I would talk with voters, they would want to talk to me about issues that, even though I was running for Congress, most of them were more local. They might not always know it, but they'd say, well, what are you going to do about our schools? And I'd have to apologize and say, okay, so I'm running for Congress. We don't have a whole lot of impact on this, but here's my opinion, and here's what I'll try to do from the federal perspective.
Right.
80% of the conversations had to do with crime or education. And so being on the education committee, trying to get some new ideas socialized. I've been an advocate for, I don't know how popular any of these things are. I don't poll. We don't got enough money for polling. But, 9 to 5 school day, year-round school.
I'm a big proponent of year-round school.
I went to one when I was in elementary school, and good thing kids don't vote, because they wouldn't vote for me based on some of these proposals, because it sounds like I'm about to give them more homework and extend the school day. But when you have year-round school, honestly, it doesn't mean that you have less vacation. That's the first thing. It's just the vacation time gets allocated differently. I think it's 9 weeks on, 3 weeks off, or something like that. And then the 9 to 5, sophomore and junior year of high school, I went to a school with a very unfortunate acronym called EBRATS, East Baton Rouge Arts and Technology School. It was a charter school downtown, but it was 9 to 5. And I remember when my parents first talked about sending me there, it sounded like boarding school. I had no interest in it. You very quickly get used to it, and more importantly, it very much mirrors an adult day. It's more convenient for adults. It gives us the ability to feed kids that aren't getting fed at home, that sort of thing. So being able to try to innovate some ideas in our education system, in addition to just advocating for the folks that are there, making sure that teachers aren't having to come out of pocket for pencils and pencil pouches and stuff like that. But I want at the very least, the first year or two, for me just to be a good representative. I don't want to be flashy. I want to be good, and I want to be responsive. And so my committee assignments, hopefully, my committee preferences are based on the responses that I've gotten largely from constituents. There were some when I was running for Congress that were a little bit more fantastical because I just have some interests. Like,
Sure.
I wanted to be on the what's the space committee? I can't remember what the space committee was. We don't have one here, but
Yet.
well, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Stennis is here, isn't it?
It is, but I'm not sure how active it is in like ongoing projects right now. And NASA is downsizing in terms of a lot of what it's doing. It does a lot more research. It does a lot more public partnerships.
You went to a charter school.
I did.
Charter schools are here to stay. They're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
Pragmatically speaking, we have to learn how to live with charters and do the best that we can with them. I've never been a big proponent of charter schools, primarily because they take dollars away from public schools. And there's no evidence that I have seen that in the state of Louisiana, I can't speak for other places in the country, in the state of Louisiana, charter school students do appreciably better than kids in neighborhood schools. I think magnet programs have been far more successful than charter schools have been. And I see them as money grabs for corporations who come in. We just recently had a charter say, well, bye, we're gone.
Yep.
And that happens more and more. And when I had Deidre Lannis here, I asked him about charter schools and whether or not East Baton Rouge Parish would continue to support charter schools. And one of the things that he informed me of, I did not know, is that the parish can veto a charter school application, and they can appeal to Bessie, and Bessie will put the charter school in place over the objection of the local school board. As a prospective legislator, what's your thought on that? You just said education was one of your interests, so help me with that.
So and maybe I'm old school. What I always thought charter schools were supposed to be were complements to the school system, to the broader public school system, sort of laboratories of innovation, if you will, that they were designed to be the exception, not the rule, where you could try things that were not more standardized in the school system, and then if they work, the principle is that you'd apply them more broadly to the school system, and if they don't, then they don't. But that they were never supposed to be in competition with the public school system, and they most certainly weren't supposed to replace the public school system. That is the model that I still keep in my mind as the value and the role of charter schools, and that's what I'd be guided by, which is that, like, when we start getting so many charter schools where parents are making a decision about what school to send their kid to. Do I send it to, McKinley, or do I send it to Thrive? Like, that's not what the system was designed for. And we do need to get away from that. And the reason why we have to get away from that is public education is the great equalizer. And it's the great equalizer for a lot of moral reasons, but also economic reasons. But the moral reasons are, we don't want kids to be punished for their parents' circumstances. And if we believe that everybody has at least the right to pursue the American dream, then there are certain tools that you have to being able to do that. And the greatest tool is education. In order for us to promise you a legitimate fighting shot at the American dream, and the way that we define it is always moving, but generally that you can buy your own home, you can go on vacation, buy a couple cars, raise your kids, that sort of thing, raise a family. You have to, whatever school you go to can't be depreciably worse than any other school. That the basic tools that you got around the corner are the same tools that some kid living in Beverly Hills got. That is the premise of public education. When you start introducing publicly funded competition for education, you completely dismantle that premise. It's almost impossible to say that we're making all of the possible investments we can in McKinley when we're also funding vouchers or we're allocating public funds or public facilities to these charters. That obviously says that we're not doing 100% of what we can for McKinley because now we're allocating resources outside of the public school system to other things.
Right.
For me, unless a charter school and unless a charter application can indicate a couple of things. One, how its purpose will benefit the broader school system, the existing community-based public schools, and what its end date is. I think that a charter should have a beginning and an end date. If you can't give me those two things,
The end date is when they decide that they're leaving.
not acceptable. Not acceptable. Oh, and one other thing. And if you are operating in a either publicly owned facility or a facility that was purchased in part with public funds, what is the plan for transitioning that facility after the end date back to the public, or at the very least compensating the public for its public contribution for it? If those three things aren't checked on the box, I'm opposed to the creation of that charter school. I'm also opposed to the ability for Bessie to approve a school that the local school district does not think is necessary or for whatever reason found issues with. I don't believe that it should have that power at all. I think that the local school district, its job is not just the mandate of curriculum and personnel management. I think it's also the educational environment in that area. That's its governing mandate. And so, if there's a way that I can look at that at the state level, and I'm always mindful, I'm going into a super minority, and so some of these are going to be quixotic adventures. But if there's a way for me to adjust that where we can reassert a local school board's ability to be the final say on the development of charter schools in its geographic jurisdiction, I'd absolutely be in favor of that. I think that, private interests have found a backdoor to education policy and public funds through the charter system, and they've manipulated it. There are good charter schools. A lot of people have gotten great educations at charter schools. They just should not replace the public school system.
I think that the success or failure of a charter school is dependent upon the individual and not necessarily the school
Sometimes, yeah.
itself.
It depends on how creative or innovative they've gotten.
I don't see any empirical data that tells me that Johnny gets a better education at a charter school than he gets at a neighborhood school.
And sometimes it's not about that, though.
I do see where Johnny gets a better education at a magnet program as opposed to either a charter or a neighborhood school. And selfishly, I'm a product of magnet schools. I know that they work. I have nieces who are products of magnet schools. I know that they work. I don't see the same level of success with charter schools. I see them primarily as money grabs and as projects of conservative, primarily white people who want to keep their children away from children who look like you and me in school, and not necessarily have to adhere to the same rules. Comparing a charter school to a public school is like comparing the United States Post Office to FedEx. Why can't everybody deliver packages like FedEx? Well, because FedEx can say we're not delivering here.
Yeah, that's right.
And FedEx can charge essentially whatever they want to deliver a package, whereas the United States Postal Service has to adhere to certain mandates. The same thing is true with public schools versus private schools. Public schools have to have certified teachers. Private schools do not. Parochial schools do not. And to a large extent, these charters do not.
And what you're touching on is the concern that a lot of people have, which is, in effect, what the charter system has become is a backdoor way of people getting a free private education.
Yeah. So, I just wanted to make my case.
I share all the concerns. The only thing that I don't, because there are some people who believe in getting rid of just the presence of charter schools altogether. I do
I
because
think
of
that's unrealistic. They're here. They're not going anywhere.
even beyond that, from a theoretical perspective, I still, and it's similar to my view of politics. I think that politics should be like the West Wing. I get that it's not, but I wish that it was. Theoretically, I like the idea of having a couple charter schools that are at the forefront of innovation and are trying new things. And then in 5 years, we look at the data and we're like, you know what? Like, it does really work if we get like kids laptops and tablets and all this.
Right.
And so we'll implement that. And that's what I want to see. I want to see a pipeline of innovation from a handful of charter schools that then make their way into the broader school system, because we do need to be invested in how does our school system evolve. The school system should not be the same as it was 10 years ago, because the needs are different.
Sure.
But it does feel, this is the one area where I think that charters and private schools have an advantage is they have the ability to be more flexible. And so I'd like to see that flexibility utilized in a way that benefits the broader school system. It's not, but it'd be nice.
I've had you here for an hour and 20 minutes. One other topic,
Yes.
and then we'll close it. What seems to be the problem with the State Department of Environmental Quality?
What do you mean?
Well, the head, Miss Gia Cometto, who was one of the first appointees of Governor Landry, seems to have developed, according to news reports, a toxic environment where it makes it difficult for people to work and do their job. There has been high turnover in that department, and I'm concerned about it because environment is a big issue.
Yeah.
Too many places in this city, in this state, where you have to boil water in order for people to drink it. Too many places where plants operate right next door to schools.
Yep.
And while the governor is advocating for deregulation, industry is not adhering to the regulations that currently exist, either federal or state. So I would imagine that Ms. Giacometto was hired in order to make sure that the state was in compliance with the law, state and federal. It does not seem to be happening. It's a state. I know she's an appointed person, but you're going into the state legislature. What's your thought about the Department of Environmental Quality?
Well, I think that the Department of Environmental Quality, I think DEQ has often been, its mandate changes. I think it's one of the more radical shifts in terms of mandates changing from administration to administration. When it's been Republican governors, it has largely been folks that are there to rubber stamp industry into compliance. Either they are compliant, or we're going to look at it with rose-colored glasses to make sure that relatively little needs to be done for you to be in compliance. And when it's been Democratic governors, the compliance has been a little bit more strict. Not significantly more, because again, people are accepting money from everybody, and oil and gas certainly plays in both sides. But I have found that in Democratic administrations, there's just been a little bit more of at least a feeling, the performative nature of making sure that you're compliant. I am not aware of what the personnel issues are there, but what I can absolutely say is that in the state legislature, DEQ is obviously going to be an important department for me to have oversight over, because, as I mentioned before, a good chunk of the industry is in this district.
Yes.
And so a good chunk of my jurisdiction is over your Shells and your Exxons and things like that. So it's important for that department to be effective, but also being honest, in a Republican administration with a Republican appointee, I don't know what effectiveness looks like. I think that there's probably an independent aspect in the legislature of trying to at least compel some degree of compliance, aside from DEQ, calling industry leaders ahead to testify, looking over applications and things like that. But I imagine that most of what I'll be able to do in the legislature relative to DEQ is going to be shifting vegetables around the plate. That's just the nature of Republican appointees when it comes to the environment here, and especially in the age of Trump, where I expect states like Louisiana, Texas, Alaska, stuff like that, to be high on the priority list of Trump trying to achieve some of his domestic energy goals. And that's going to be a fight that we have to fight, and it's going to be a tough one in a state that is dominated by industry.
Louisiana is a solidly red state.
It is.
Yet, when it came to cabinet appointments or presidential appointments, very few Louisianans were appointed to anything. Frankly, I was hopeful that the governor would be appointed to something, get him out of the governor's mansion.
You got to find a job he'd be good at.
Well, he thought attorney general. But why do you think it is that in such a solidly red state, there did not seem to be rewards of a political nature in this new administration?
I think that's obvious. I think in states where you almost effectively have single-party rule, skill, talent, merit are just kind of go down on the list of like traits that most of those politicians have. It's more about, are you going to keep the trains running? Are you going to keep the deals going? In a state like that, and especially the way that Landry got elected, he didn't get elected because of his articulation of policy or his understanding of the different communities here. He just got elected by, essentially wearing a Trump sweater all day. Mm-hmm. That's not going to equip you with the skills necessary to run a large, 100,000 person plus federal department. Mm-hmm. I don't think that Governor Landry has done anything in the time that he's been in office, whether it's been at Attorney General or as governor, that would demonstrate his competency to run a federal department. I think the Republicans in this state who have demonstrated competency, I think there's a correlation here. They often have criticized Donald Trump. So, and I'll try not to compliment those ones too much because in a worst versus worstest scenario, I want the worst to win. So there are a couple of Republicans here that I respect because of their willingness to criticize Trump, but that also probably has an impact on their ability to get an appointment. There was one in particular that I spoke to, one who's fairly familiar with this area, who wanted an appointment, but explained to me that the Trump people said that he wasn't Trumpy enough. And so, and to be honest, that would have been the one appointment that, selfishly, here in Louisiana, I would have been supportive of, because I know that person understood some of the transportation needs of this state. And I'll leave it at that. People who are inside baseball, people know who I'm talking about.
Look at that camera, please, sir, and tell our listeners and our viewers why they should vote for you for State Senate.
My name's Quentin Anthony Anderson. I'm running for the State Senate in District 14. I think you should vote for me because I think that our district, our people deserve bold, unapologetic representation. And I think that they deserve objective representation. You may not always agree with me. That'd be weird if you did. That would mean that you're a clone of me and I need to find you. But you are always going to know where I come from. You're going to know how I came to my conclusions. You're going to have access to me. You're going to be able to talk to me. I'm going to represent you to the best of my ability, and it's not going to be with outside interference. When I'm at the table negotiating for your interests, that is me and you, nobody else. There's not somebody in my pocket. And that's the way that I think that it should be. I think that's what restores faith in our government. So I'm asking for your vote, February 15th. I'm Quentin Anthony Anderson.
Early voting begins when?
February 1st.
February 1st. Okay. Thank you for taking the time to come and share with us today, sir. Thank you for viewing. Thank you for listening. We'll be back again next time.